Oh yeah. All right. Hey all, I'm Jon Copans. I'm the still newish executive director of the Old Folks Home, mostly I want to spend time talking about our mobility audit, but I also want to just give you a little overview quickly, if you'll bear with me, tell you a little bit about Old Folks Home and particularly our Everybody Bikes program, because I think I need to do that everywhere I go, honestly. So, Old Folks Home, we are a nonprofit bike shop in Burlington's Old North End. Our origin story is that when you think about Old Folks, it's really the merger of two entities. One, Glenn Eames founded a for-profit bike shop on the other side of the street on North Winooski back in 2000. He sold new and used bikes there and had a fabulous bike museum up in the attic of that space. And then a few years after that, a gentleman named Ron Manganiello started an organization called Bike Recycle Vermont. And Bike Recycle Vermont was a nonprofit, totally volunteer-based at its beginnings, that simply like harvested bikes from the community that people were discarding, got them fixed up with volunteer labor, and got them to people who needed them. And what happened in 2015 is, oh, that's where we are in the Old North End. Oops, I think I skipped. Sorry. Oh, no, maybe I just got rid of a slide. What happened in 2015 is the nonprofit bought the for-profit bike shop. And then in 2018, we moved into one location. And so essentially, we are a retail shop for anyone who walks in, but we also still gather a lot of donated bikes and fix them up and get them back out into the community. Our mission is to build community and opportunity through access to bikes. You know, to put it a different way, at Old Folks Home, we believe that the bicycle is a magical object. Essentially, bikes have had the same essential design since sometime in the middle of the 19th century. And when I say the same essential design, I mean two wheels and a chain and a crankset and a saddle, right? The classic, what they called it at the time, was a safety bicycle. If you think about it, that is still essentially the same exact bicycle that we're riding today, a good 160 years after its invention. And the reason for that is that it was just really well designed and it suits the human body. It's the most efficient way, period, full stop, for a human or any creature to traverse the land, essentially, right? That efficiency of being able to roll, the freewheeling that you can do when you roll on a bicycle makes it the most efficient way to get around. It's healthy. It's so it'll come as no surprise. We believe pretty passionately. I believe pretty passionately about the bicycle and the transformative impact that it can have. And therefore, so much of our mission is about creating access to bikes. We do that through our Everybody Bikes program, and that is where we take donated bikes and fix them up, as I've already described. We have volunteers who do that. We have professional mechanics who do that at the shop. We have pretty flexible guidelines for folks to participate in the Everybody Bikes program. And you know, some details here, because honestly, we are always looking for more people to participate in the Everybody Bikes program. So with the Everybody Bikes program, typically bikes start at $50 and go up to maybe $200. You see 50% off of bikes, $400 and less, 50% off any service, 35% off any parts and accessories. Very much we're focused on making bikes as affordable as they can be. And then we have other programs at Old Spokes. We have a volunteer night every Monday night. We have classes. We do workshops to teach people how to fix their bikes, because that's part of the marvelousness of bikes. I do no home projects. I'm not handy when it comes to working on my house. I do not get under the hood of my car, but I feel comfortable and confident to take a wrench to a bicycle because it's a very simple mechanical object. Anybody can learn how to fix a flat tire and how to do some of the basic maintenance on a bike. We have bike bonanzas every spring and fall, and that's where we give away around 100 bikes to kids in Burlington and Winooski and surrounding areas. And then every Thursday we have youth shop, and that's where kids in the neighborhood just come in with their bikes to work with us on fixing them up. We sort of support them in repairing those bikes so that they learn some of the skills themselves. But ultimately what they really need is just a functioning bike, because for kids who live in the neighborhood where Old Spokes is, and Winooski, we get a ton of kids from Winooski as well, those bikes are just transportation for them. It's how they get around, how they connect to their friends, how they get to school, and how they do all those things that kids do. You know, the Boys and Girls Club is a neighbor to us in the Old North End, and what they use is the expression, bikes are gold for kids living in the Old North End, and we see that day in and day out. We also give away a ton of bikes at U Shop. I think we've given away about 160 bikes this season. So let me get more to the mobility audit, and as I do that, I want to so Everybody Bikes program, we did a survey of the participants in that program, and this is just some data that I think sort of leads up to the audit. What mode of transportation for our Everybody Bikes customers, how do you get around most frequently? Bicycle, car, bus, public transit, walking. You see a pretty good distribution there. And then I think it's also helpful, you know, how do you use your bicycle most often? This is for folks who've used our Everybody Bikes program to get to my job, school, appointments, to get exercise, to go for fun, right? 33% there. And then for occasional use, you know, when it's more convenient than another form of transportation. Just a quick note here, which is I think there is a natural inclination. I mean, look, we're talking transportation today, and I think a lot of people tend to put bicycles into a different category than transportation. They tend to put bicycles into this category that we call recreation. I bristle a little bit at this sort of clear siloing of those two things. I think a lot of people, well, first of all, you can actually bike to get somewhere and enjoy the trip. And then it is recreation and transportation at the same time. And what we experience at the shop is that there's a lot of people who really fall into both categories. And so sure, there are some folks for whom biking is purely a source of exercise. And then there's others for whom it is an essential form of transportation. It's not really about pleasure. It's about getting to things that they need to get to in a more efficient way. But I sort of push against this sort of dichotomy between recreation and transportation because I think there's a lot of overlap for a lot of folks. All right, the Old North End Mobility Audit. This was a collaboration with the Chittenden Regional Planning Commission. We had a lot of support from a number of different organizations. We convened something called the Transportation Equity Coalition in putting this audit together. And here's just a sort of quick descriptor of some of the members of the community representatives that were part of the creation of this audit and the implementation of this audit. So you get a sense of this team was really fundamental to doing this work and not just advisory, I would say. They very much were part of implementation, not just design. Just a quick, you know, I think it's helpful, again, to look at other data sources. Typically, when we think about transportation and how people get around, the American Community Survey is a good way to do that. And I think what's powerful about the mobility audit is it focuses in much more tightly in a smaller geographic area with more depth, but it is helpful to just get a sense of like, here's what the American Community Survey says about means of transportation divided by race and ethnicity in the city of Burlington. That data was helpful for Old Spokes and the team as they really designed the audit for the Old North End. So to methodology, here's how data was gathered. There was a survey. That survey sort of had, I would say, two modes. One mode was being very active and present at certain locations and with a lot of help with translation. In other words, going to communities, having community partners bring us in to implement that survey. As you can see, that was working at the food shelf in that week before Thanksgiving. That was working with the Association of Africans Living in Vermont. That was doing surveys over the phone with translators. We did compensate survey participants for their time in participating. And then the Transportation Equity Coalition, those members that I shared with you before, they also spread the word through their network as well. And then we did sort of more of that general survey work of like just putting it out through Front Porch Forum and through other methods into the community as well. And then we hosted focus groups. We again worked with the Association of Africans Living in Vermont. We really focused on youth as part of that work. As you see, we did some work with our own youth shop crew. We worked with the senior center and then homeless community members at a new place. You know, note the disclaimer, like we were gathering data in November 2020 through June 2021. It was a rather anomalous moment in time, to put it mildly. I think we probably still feel like we're living in a little bit of an anomalous moment of time, but this was probably a heightened moment in time. So things that probably skews the results in some way or another. I wouldn't begin to guess how it does that. Just to highlight actually one other thing, sample was 125 respondents total for the survey. Data analysis done by Kirsten Nielsen. Kirsten not only is a data expert, but she also lives in the neighborhood and is a member of that equity coalition as well. So like that gives you a sense that like, as I said a few times, the equity members of the team were not just advisory, they very much were participants in implementation. Some maps, always nice to look at maps. A lot of what we did was ask people sort of where do they need to go and how do they get there? And I should say, this mobility audit is still one of the front slides on our website, oldspokeshome.com, and we're out of paper copies. Otherwise, I would have brought some with you. But I know that these slides don't quite do it justice in terms of like reading things carefully. But so for us, a lot of what we were doing is trying to get a sense of what kind of trips people make and how they make them. Here are some findings. And just to zoom out a little bit as we get to the findings, what I feel like is powerful about this audit is that it is sort of shining a more intense, detailed light into one densely populated neighborhood in the city of Burlington to get a sense of what mobility actually looks like for people who live in that neighborhood. I don't think it's hard to know where you find that data in another way. Census data doesn't come close to giving this kind of detail in terms of what people experience day in and day out. You know, some of the big picture takeaways, almost 30% of households, well, first of all, 27% of households have 0 vehicles. 37% have 1 vehicle. 30% of households with no access to a vehicle are comprised of 4 or more people. Here is the following transportation methods that users have the most difficulty traveling to work. So, and you see sort of what are the methods that they use to get to these various sources of transportation. You know, to be clear, Old North End of Burlington, not representative of this broader state, right? Look how narrow sort of the personal vehicle is as a mode choice for folks living in the Old North End. Transportation choices most often utilized here. You know, one of the wonderful things about the Old North End is it is a very walkable place. Like, you can access services by foot. You can access school. You can access other things. But I think related to that, you know, one of the things that emerged as, well, so let's go through a few more, well, so we'll get to it here. What kinds of infrastructure improvements would make getting around easier? You know, one of the things for me when I first got to Old Spokes and read the audit, right, it happened before I got there, is quality of sidewalks. Not something that, to be honest, I put much thought into before reading the audit and sort of hearing from those folks who created this, which is, to be honest, when you walk around the Old North End, it is, those sidewalks are in rough shape. And so if you are rolling around that neighborhood as opposed to walking, it's a major impediment. And if you are, if you're a little uneven, imagine you use a walker, or imagine if you're not confident, or frankly, wintertime sidewalks in the Old North End, just lakes that are either water, slush, ice, or some mix, right? So you're often doing this navigation where you're sort of having to go onto the grass, into the median, onto the road. You know, it is, sidewalks aren't just about aesthetics. It is fundamentally a way that people get from point A to point B. Particularly, like, if you think about, if you're walking, you know, for most people, they don't access the bus right at their doorstep. They're walking a block or two. They're walking down to the corner to access that bus. So sidewalks really emerge as, and so you see better sidewalks, snow removal. Having my own car. You know, I think this got talked about. I came a little late, but you could tell it was a topic of some discussion this morning. I think the reality of our lifestyle, community design, and infrastructure is that for people, in fact, we're experiencing this right now. We have a mechanic who's a high school student who's been at Old Spokes basically since he was an 8-year-old. He is saving up money for that first car, and he just can't wait to get it. So the reality is, while for Old Spokes it sort of pains us to acknowledge this, for a lot of folks, a car is really an important part of adding to the mobility of the household. I guess, yeah. So you see some quotes there. I can't see my son on Sundays because the bus line does not go all the way down to where he lives on a Sunday, right? Those kinds of sort of, when you do not have your own personal vehicle, when you're dependent on public transit, the schedule dictates so much of what your ability is to get around. You know, part of what the Equity Coalition did was just get out and walk. and do some documentation as well. Not to beat the sidewalk bush too hard, but like I don't know how well you can see the pictures, but you really do get a sense. Lack of drainage, ice buildup, just uneven surfaces, difficult curb cuts. This was a member of the team did this hand-drawn map where they just looked at every single intersection. I'm forgetting what street. That might be North Street, actually, and sort of all of the different issues around making that cross of that relatively busy street. And finally, just some recommendations that came out of the audit. Slow down on busy streets. There are some busy streets where people drive pretty fast. Manhattan Drive and like Riverside and North Winooski. Clearly marked, sheltered, and well-lit bus stops that include schedules, more frequent service. Sidewalks, as I've talked about. Protected bike lanes, repainting existing lanes. And I think part of what I want to emphasize here is, yes, we are passionate about bikes. Yes, we believe in bikes. But like as the convener of this mobility audit in collaboration with the Regional Planning Commission, we certainly set those inclinations aside. It was really important to listen to our participants and to fairly represent what we heard. Wheelchair accessibility and then maintenance. I mean, what you see sort of in in this cluster is sort of, and I would say even bus shelters, right? A lot of that feels like some of the basic infrastructure and maintenance that is needed in order for choices like walking and riding the bus to be more comfortable, to feel safer, and to really sort of be elevated as options and choices for people. Just some notes on public engagement. And I will say, after sitting and listening to Reverend Hughes earlier in this very room, I would not represent what we've done as good enough even, right? We can always be doing better on the public engagement front. But I do think it's important to acknowledge like the way that we have our conversations around transportation often in the past has meant that certain voices are really not represented in those conversations. And the audit certainly worked to address and reconcile that, but I would say it is a real work in progress for us at Old Spokes Home. And I would say probably more generally, as we think about how those decisions get made about the focus of resources, really designing a process that's inclusive is imperative. There you go. See, it's shop. So, yeah. I think. Dale.
Is there time for questions?
Please, absolutely. I hope so.
So
yeah.
I assume that you presented this to the city of Burlington, and I'm curious what kind of reception you got, and if there's any reason to hope that some of these suggestions will be implemented.
It's a good question. I'm looking at a city councilor right in front of you there, and we chatted briefly about it. The hard thing for me is I wasn't at Old Spokes when this audit was when it first hit the ground. Jen Green, who's on our board, and I were just talking in the hallway, and we both have a sense that we didn't make the splash that we should have in terms of what this represents and the influence that it could have as people think about how we're making investments. And so I believe we presented it to the Walk Bike Council. I'm not sure how much of an audience we had at Public Works in the city of Burlington or with the larger council as well. And
I was just gonna, like, there are two public works commissioners here.
There we go. Yeah.
So I heard about this from Laura Jacoby, the former
Yeah.
ED, but Brendan, I don't think this came to the commission. If it stayed with walk bike, I think it stayed there.
I didn't see it in an
Because
official capacity.
In an
Yeah,
official
the
capacity.
Because I was
Yeah.
like, this is, we need to see this, yeah.
It makes a big difference in terms of things like the matrix for the sidewalk and street repair program, of which,
Yeah.
if you look at their matrix, it does not have the demographics of the old North End, and it underrates the old North End in a serious way. I mean, I had this conversation with engineers like 3 months ago, but.
Yeah, I feel like you and I talked about that,
Yeah.
like the way they just look at basic foot traffic to decide where they are going to improve sidewalks. But it seemed designed essentially to address downtown foot traffic and not so much get at neighborhood foot traffic. And I'm not sure all foot traffic is equal, honestly. Yeah,
Right, it's not, but every trip begins with walking.
exactly. That's right. Yeah.
I had a couple questions. Could you go back to some of the data slides that you had?
Yes.
Because
Which
I
one?
thought, well, so this was sort of interesting, I guess, how you got to where you were getting. Predominantly in this group, I guess, people walk. Did you get the demographic data also though because it would seem like if predominantly people are walking, I guess I would say it would make the most sense to invest in sidewalks and public transit because you would get and capture the greatest amount of walkers and people who use the bus. And that those would be where to put your investments. I also thought it was not surprising that if your demographics were focused more at non-whites in terms of, if you go back one more slide, the personal vehicle, or two more, whatever it was, the personal vehicle, the initial demographics you showed on how people's modes of transit from the American survey.
Maybe this one, yeah.
Correct, so the white households clearly are able to drive alone, and that is, I am guessing largely in part to their ability to own and have and maintain and operate a car.
Yeah.
And so it's not surprising, depending on I don't know what your end demographic for the 125 people were, but if they were not statistically balanced with the same amount of you find in the distribution in the neighborhood, then it would make sense that you'd see a smaller amount actually getting around by personal car as well.
Yeah.
But it would seem that the sidewalks would be the greatest benefit to the neighborhood as well as that public transit, because you catch the most people and impact them. That's just my observation.
Yeah,
Very
I think you're
interesting
asking a good question, which is sort of, was there some, let's say, algorithm from our participant group of 125 to then translate to sort of the broader demographics of the Old North End?
Sure.
And I actually don't have that at my fingertips. I know some of that work happened.
Yeah.
I see Paul. I don't know if you're reacting or.
I'm not.
Okay, yeah, but that's definitely a fair question for sure. Paul, yeah.
One quick observation, then a question for you. I've used this data set a lot, and it's a really challenging data set. I really appreciate that this survey tried to go deeper, because this is based on a sampling of households being asked what was the predominant way that they got to work over a 1 week span at some point when they were surveyed.
Yeah.
So, I happened to get one this past year, and it was snowing like heck that week.
Yeah.
And that happened to be the representative of, the only time I'm gonna answer it in 10 years. And it was not for me what my normal is, but it said, what was your average this past week?
It was a precise, yeah.
And you don't get to pick two things.
Right.
One thing. So it's, I say all that because I really appreciate how much the survey went into what are the ways that you get two different places, because I think that tells a story that we don't otherwise have information on. And so my question is, and knowing that you weren't involved in putting this together, John, if from lessons learned from this, if other communities or other parts of Burlington were thinking about putting a survey like this together, what has what stood out as being really valuable and what might have been done differently?
Ooh, yeah, that's hard for me to answer. Honestly, like, my inclination on that is that we sort of bring in a Brian Davis or the partners at CCRPC who really were there for implementation. Most of what I have is sort of the flat document and less around the process side. As I've emphasized before, I think part of the power of this For Old Spokes Home is that we brought together this equity coalition to really work not only on design, but also on implementation. And that, in all ways that I sense it, really was fundamental to our, to the structure and some of the learning that we had. So I would say that feels like a very important component. But I'd be reticent to go much further than that, honestly.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
To give a quick time check, we're kind of at the end,
Oh,
but
yeah.
people are welcome to stay.
I think we can wrap, maybe one last question from Dan. and
Yeah,
then-
I mean, my big question was, just like the city council, the other group to bring this to is Green Mountain Transit's board, right? And so we talk about those amenities, we talk about their improvement. V-Trans wants to improve the rider experience. So getting those bus stops improved, maybe increasing frequency, I can't guarantee anything there because that is really costly.
That's a tough one.
But if we include, make better, safer, shelters and some of the sidewalk connections, that sounds really great for the public transit riders.
That's a good,
So-
very good, yes. Thank you. I appreciate that suggestion. So,
Agreed, Dan.
thanks, everyone. Great questions.